Well, we're in the metropolis of Madison, Wisconsin here. You can just see all the development around us. And there's a Madison chain of lakes here right in the city. And surprisingly, really good pan fishing here. We're with Jim Kusuda. We've known each other for years, and we're gonna come out here and just explore some of the bluegill opportunities. But it always ceases to amaze me how nice a fish you get, despite
being right in the city of Madison.
In the city. It's a weird backdrop, but it works. Come on. Oh, there he is. That is why we're here. Big bluegills in shallow water.
There we go. That's what I'm talking about.
You know, it always amazes me about fishing is just how there's such great fishing all over the country. And a lot of times, you know, you don't have to necessarily go to some remote exotic location to catch great fish. We're in here in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a pretty large community, you know, basically considered a big city. And despite the fact that there's all kinds of people, there's great fishing, great pan fishing in particular.
The Madison Lakes are part of what's called the Yahara River system, and there's 4 lakes. Mendota's the largest one, then Monona, then Waubesa, and then Kaganza. And the city of Madison is right between Mendota and Monona, so we have really good fishing really close to where a lot of people live, and it's an excellent resource.
There we go. Oh yeah, there's a crappie. Look at that. Not a bad crappie at all. And you know, you look at this area around Madison here where we're fishing, there's just a lot of good pan fishing opportunities, but it's really metro fishing. You know, there's a city all around you. See you later. This particular area is really, you know, kind of home to a lot of different tactics and innovation. You know, the pulsator rods, the purist jigs, you know, and long poles, you know, fishing shallow water. And obviously that's really still popular today. Long been a popular fishing destination, a popular area, you know, and it's just known for producing shallow water panfish. Panfish are less than 6 feet of water.
Okay, here's a fish. Let's get him to take it. Here he comes. It's a nice one. All right. Well, it's a start. Bluegill fishing that we do here is in shallow weeds, and finding these productive areas is important. Some people will actually go out in their boats and look things over. Myself, I just go out and try areas that I know are actually supportive of the kind of environment and food that the fish like. So he'll look for fertile weeds that have zooplankton and water lice in there, other kind of bugs and minnows that the fish want to eat. Here comes a fish. See a mark here. Let me play him. Let me play him. Come on, baby. Come on. All right, here he comes. Okay. Quality fish.
You know, the reality is if I can get away with 3 or 4 pound test when I'm fishing for panfish, I'll use that heavier line because I'm just going to be more efficient. Less can go wrong when you use that heavier line. But in a lot of metro lakes, a lot of heavily pressured lakes, a lot of shallow water, you have to drop down a 1 or 2 pound test to get bit. And so you look at Minneapolis, you look at Madison where we're at today, high fishing pressure, fish in shallow water, you're going to have to use small jigs, you're going to have to use light line, 1, 2 pound tests. We've seen this across the country. And one thing that anglers are starting to do a lot of is we're starting to drop down into using fluorocarbon instead of monofilament. Fluorocarbon has a little bit more abrasion resistance, it has a little bit less stretch, and so there's a lot to like about using fluorocarbon when you're ice fishing. The biggest thing, if you're going to use 1 or 2 pound test, be really careful when you're tying your knots. A lot of times I'm using a Palomar knot. Make sure you get some spit or saliva on that knot. Be real slow and careful when you cinch it up, but the knots are probably the Achilles heel when you're using 1 or 2 pound tests. But take care of your line. Once that line starts to get some twist in it and it starts to wrap up on the rod tip, change it, get rid of it. Run it through your fingers, drag it along the snow. You know, try to get that twist out of the line, but change your line often. If you change your line off and use high quality line on a tough bite, I guarantee you're going to catch a lot more panfish.
Jason Mitchell Outdoors is brought to you by these industry leaders.
Woohoo! Yeah, what's my favorite series of hubs? The Clam C series shelters work best for us.
Hey, what's our favorite ice sub shelter? The X series from Clam Outdoors.
Choose the hub shelter that's right for you at Clam Outdoors. Pursue the ice.
A Vexilar is responsible for more fish being caught than any other piece of equipment you could buy.
You know what? Fishing lures and gadgets have come and gone over the last 60 years. But Vexilar's mission statement has been true, helping anglers catch more fish.
Vexilar is the gold standard in sonar performance and reliability in flasher sonar technology.
Your ice fishing adventure begins and ends with a Vexilar by your side.
Happy 60th, Vexilar!
Introducing the Rise Float Suit with motion float technology. Breathable, waterproof, secure, and all the features that make the difference. Waterproof cell phone pocket, rapid drain system, and maximum flexibility. Fish with security in the Rise Float Suit from Ice Armor by Clam. Rise above. Clam Outdoors. Pursue the ice.
We're just checking these areas out with the underwater camera, and for shallow weeds, panfish, these cameras can be game changers because you just scan areas, see where all the weeds are. But basically you're just looking for a lot of weeds on these flats, so then you just find these openings and holes, and a lot of times you'll see fish.
This is how it's done, like this. Oh man, this is a tank. There we go. All right. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Let's get this big one back in the water. I finally got a nice one. We've been fishing, it's a hard, cold conditions, and we're only fishing shallow water, so getting hooked up's difficult, but I downsized. And I just went to one small spike on a tiny gold drop jig, and that was the ticket. That felt so good to get a nice one on. Doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's worth it.
And I think one of the things that makes this fishing so good is the fact that you have these big, large, shallow, massive bays that fill up with weeds. And so they're so big that, you know, you could fish an area really hard, but the reality is that 200 yards away, there's probably another weed clump that hasn't been touched all winter.
Hey, you got another one. Nice one, nice one. This is a big one. What do we got? Ooh, a crappie. Hey, hey, hey. Nice. Hit the little gold drop jig with one spike. Actually, the fish are starting to show up here. For those that like crappie, they're mixed in here with the bluegills. They're a good hard fighting fish. Beautiful too. The coloration is just excellent.
You know, I met Jim Kusuda, goodness, it's probably been over 20 years ago, and you know, it's back in some of the earliest trap attack days. And you know, what always struck me about Jim is that it's a classy individual, just very soft-spoken, but very knowledgeable. And so for years, you know, I didn't even know what his last name is because we always called him Mendota Jim. You know, and over the years, you know, the perch bite was really what made this body of water famous. And you know, lately over the last 10, 15 years, it seems like that bluegill cycle is really coming on strong. And so you don't hear as much about the perch, but the bluegills are getting a lot more attention. Come on. Oh, there he is. Oh, 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 oh. No, look at that. Look at that. Oh my. That is why we're here. Big bluegills in shallow water. Doesn't really get any better. I mean, it doesn't take very long to bring them up, but boy, do these fish fight hard too underneath that ice. As soon as you stick them, they wrap it up in the transducer cable. Gorgeous. That fish is barely squeezed in up that little hole. Get out of here. You know, just light lining. You know, these are gnarly conditions. It's cold out, blowing snow. And so we've decided to use the shelter just to kind of block some of the elements because it is a light finesse bite. You definitely want to be quiet out here. Make as little noise as possible. And that's kind of one of the beauties of finding these little weed pockets, is that you can get hunkered down in an area and just let things settle down and wait for these fish to just kind of roll in. And they just kind of collect in these pockets and lanes. And so these fish are just roaming these shallow weed flats, and you get a little gap or a little opening in those weeds. Those fish just accumulate in them. I'm still going with the waxworm. I know Jim's been experimenting with a single spike. And they just come through a few at a time.
Normally when we fish here, we don't fish in fish traps. It's usually a lot nicer out, so you don't need to be covered up. You're out here getting a suntan. So this is enough to be able to be out of the wind and somewhat comfortable and be able to watch my line and detect the bites.
Oh, here comes a nice mark. There he is. Oh yeah, another nice crappie. That fills up the hole. Come here. Oh yeah. That is nice. You know, these fish are just so shallow. But it's just a matter of, using underwater cameras, find the lanes, find the open pockets, and, just set up in these areas. There you go. So this is really just a finesse game. A lot of this water, these fish do see some pressure. It's light line, 1-2 pound test. Just really small teardrops, small horizontal jigs. A lot of times it's waxworms. And a lot of times when these fish come in, they're not going to be really aggressive necessarily. Sometimes you just have to almost just hold your rod still and just maybe the most delicate quiver. And that's why these spooler reels can be so effective just for managing your line. You take 2 pound test, and basically when you lay that jig in the water, you just want it to just hang. If it turns or spins at all, fix your line. It is finesse fishing.
These are really intelligent fish, and they test your will. Who has more patience, you or the fish? They're really a challenge, and they're so fun catching them in this shallow water. And if you want to bring some home for a dinner, you can keep some. I personally don't like keeping a big bluegill. It just doesn't fry up as nicely as a medium-sized one, and it's actually better for the populations too. But they sure are fun to catch.
If you're going to look at an overview map of Madison Chain, every bay, every individual lake has its own personality, but you can find quality bluegills and crappies throughout the entire system. And basically the common denominator is find that shallow water, find those shallow flats that have that weed growth, and there's going to be a population of fish there. And so it really is tremendous fishing up and down the chain.
Oh, all right, there we go, here we go. All right. I had to work him for probably a minute and a half, but here he is. I think one of the reasons that Madison has such good fishing is there's effort by both the people of the city, but also local conservation and sportsman groups like the Yahara Fishing Club.
So it's amazing, once you get off this ice, it's just this hustle and bustle big city. There's cars driving all over, there's people riding bikes, there's people jogging. You'll hear sirens off in the background, there's jets flying overhead. It's just the chaoticness of a big city. And for so many people, you can just walk out on that ice and get away from it. You just get away from it. The quietness, staring at a Vexilar, waiting for the next bite. You can get away from the city in a hurry by just going out on that ice. There we go. There. That is a great bluegill right there. Boy, these are just quality fish. Just that tiny little jig and just playing around with wax worms and spikes, but just gorgeous fish.
There's places where you can go in Madison and fish are abundant and you can catch a lot of fish. You can take kids and just have a blast. And there's other places where the fish are not very abundant, but they're quality, older fish that are really downright tricky to catch, to outwit. And it's just such a great challenge to get a big bluegill to bite. There's nothing like it. You just have this heart-stopping feel of conquest. It's just great to be able to catch a really big old bluegill, appreciate them, and let them swim. It's just a super great winter sport, and I just love it. Yep, there we are. All right. Decent.
It goes without saying that whenever you are in a metro area, a lot of times it is a finesse bite. You have to be quiet and hunker down on spots.
Now these tungsten drop jigs are really popular just because it offers just a dense body, small profile, really popular panfish jig, but even in shallow water, a lot of people are using tungsten. Reason being is it just takes the memory out of your line. They're using 4-pound test all the way down to 1-pound test. Now, if there's probably an overall size, I think that's probably the most popular, especially across Minnesota, Wisconsin. That's a size 10 hook, 6mm jig. That's just a good all-around size, especially if you're fishing for basins where that bigger profile, these fish can find it and see it from further away. I tell you what, you get into shallow water, you get in metro areas where there's heavy pressure, whether it's Minneapolis, Madison, Wisconsin, like we're here today, definitely downsize. Go down to those smaller size jigs. This is a number 14 hook, 4mm, but the smaller jigs balance up good with 1 to even 2-pound test. And so the biggest thing with tungsten jig is make sure that eyelet is perfectly center, so that it's almost like it's tuned like a crankbait. So that way when you pound that jig, If it swings off to one side, you want it to come back and swing off just like a pendulum on a clock. If it just goes off on one side out of tune, it's going to really mess up your line. And on these tough bites, when you're using 1 or 2 pound tests, that's a big deal. And so make sure that you're not as perfectly centered and that the eyelet is perfectly centered when you're using these tungsten jigs.
You know, the beauty of using a camera and fishing these weeds is that you can find the clumps, or if there's a lot of weeds, you can find those open pockets or holes, and you can hunker down and sit in one spot. And the reason that's so important is because in the shallow water, you know, these fish are going to spook around a lot if you make a lot of noise on that ice. And so obviously you have to walk out on the ice, you have to get there, and you have to drill a few holes, but basically the less commotion you can create, the better. So this Madison Chain of lakes that routinely produces some really quality bluegills, you know, fish that are up into that 10-inch range, some even bigger, but, you know, just a lot of nice fish. And so, you know, you have numbers of fish, there's certain bays, certain areas, certain community holes where you catch a lot of 6 to 8-inch fish, but then if you get off the beaten path a little bit, you know, you have the chance of catching some true, what I would consider giant class bluegills. And basically a bluegill over 9 inches, it's also tall like these fish are, that's a special fish.
Well, this is a really special resource because it's fragile. It's like the city of Madison is right in the midst of all the lakes of the Yahara chain, so we really have to make a concerted effort to keep things out of the water and keep the areas surrounding the lakes in good shape. There we go. That's good. It was a fussy bite, but 2-pound frost fluorocarbon, really light jig, and a wax worm did the number.
And there's certain areas where you're going to see a lot of anglers out on the ice, but you know, it doesn't take a lot. I mean, you'll see people just dragging a sled, maybe a 5-gallon bucket, and a rod, you know, where it's so shallow, you know, some of these people aren't even using electronics, and so it doesn't take much. You know, sometimes you'll see people coming out at late ice where they're not even bringing an auger, they're just kicking open old holes. And so it's a tremendous opportunity. It doesn't take a lot of investment, a lot of equipment, and you really have a chance at catching some really quality panfish.